is my pleasure to kick this over to Cantor Amy Robinson Katz for the CBIers in the group. She is very well known to you. For the others in the group, this is my partner in crime, my clergy buddy, the one who gives voice to the voiceless. She is absolutely extraordinary, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to come and share some of your essential texts with all of us, and I look forward to learning from you.
Thanks. I'm excited. So I have to just admit up front that this made me stretch my brain a little bit because, my job is the cantor. I'm a Hazzan. And so I'm basically a professional script reader. Like I have a script in front of me that I read. It's a holy script and I read it. It is my duty, my job to read it, to chant it in whatever melodies, that it's supposed to be. And there's a certain one for a certain time of day and a certain time of year. And I'm never without content. I always have something to do as a cantor. And to think about essential texts was to go off the script and sort of just kind of go into my own brain and my own heart and what moves me and what has moved me. So thank you, Rabbi Adam, for giving me that chance. Hi, Gracie. So anyways, so I'm going to share a few things that are my essential texts. And I hope we can just spend some time sort of reading them and talking through them together and maybe connecting them. So first I should share, I'm going to share the source sheet with you. So let me do that. Wait, before I share my screen, I'm going to put the document in the chat so you can have it. So let me do that. No, not screenshot. Hold on. Didn't want that. Okay, here we go. Just a second. Just going to share this with you. So getting there. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to share this on here it is. I'm going to share this on the screen, but I can also, there you go. You can also have it. It's coming through on the chat there. So that's the source sheet. So if you want to have your own copy of it there, and now I'm going to put it on the screen. So here we go. All right, hopefully everyone's seeing that. Let me move this so I can see all of you and this at the same time. Okay, now we're good. Is everyone seeing this PDF document that starts with Rainn Wilson on the Rich Roll podcast? All right, so Rainn Wilson, you may recognize, is the actor who is most famously known to play Dwight Schrute on The Office. So you may recognize him from that. So he was recently on the Rich Roll podcast, and I'm starting with this text or this quote from him because it came through on TikTok, and admittedly, it seems like everything these days I find out from TikTok. So I'm going to open up this conversation with this quote. So here it is. We can read it together. This is Rainn Wilson. The reason why spirituality is important is because it is reality. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Who I am and what I am is not my body. It's not even my personality. It's not the trauma I suffered. It's not what I've been through. There is a little spark of the divine inside me. We're a part of something much greater, much more beautiful than ourselves. So I want to open up with that. And I want to just spend a few moments hearing some reactions to that quote and some reactions. Maybe, can you relate to that quote? Does that quote feel Jewish to you? Love to hear from some people.
Cantor, could you leave it up for?
Sure. Let me put it back. Let me put it back up. Here it is.
Thank you.
Here it is. So especially these first two sentences, the reason why spirituality is important is because it is reality. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Can anyone relate to that? Any reactions to it? So I'll tell you, when I heard when this came across my TikTok feed, it definitely, TikTok is a place to go to be entertained and scroll through all the, things going on and different trends and videos and how-tos and whatever. And it was a refresher. It was refreshing to me to have this little snippet come through from a Hollywood actor, but and in just a moment of remembering that we are spiritual beings. And it was an interesting way to phrase it, to say that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, not human beings having a spiritual experience, sort of to prioritize the spiritual aspect of who we are, the spiritual life. So if there's no comments on this, we'll move to the next text. Oh, Mimi, do you have a comment?
Yes, I'm taking it as a reminder to me that spirituality is in whatever form it happens to be for me at the time, because that can vary too. It to me, it's a reminder
Yeah, I love that.
that I need to look at that part.
I love that. Oh, and Linda, I see your chat here. I can absolutely relate to this. It is a true perspective. Thank you. Okay. All right. So that's just an opener. Let's move on. This next text comes from Abraham Joshua Heschel, and this is a pretty deep text, and it's coming from his book God in Search of Man, which is really a collection of writings that were assembled together. And if you've read it, you know this, and if you haven't, I'll say, here's my copy right here. It's all very, very, all of Abraham Joshua Heschel's writing is extremely deep and dense and poetic. And I find that I like to read it in very small nuggets and reread it and sort of marinate on it. This is not a book that you just read through and are done with. It's a book I keep by my bed, and it's been there for the past couple of decades, I think, and I just go back to it, and there's underlines and markings, and it's a book you kind of have to take in doses and savor. So this bit is from God in Search of Man, and I want to give a heads up before we read it that it's a kind of technical. So we're going to get a little philosophical here, and then in the text after this, it will lighten up a little bit. This is pretty philosophical and kind of technical, and especially pay attention while we read this to the two words event and process, okay? Because Abraham Joshua Heschel is giving a very specific definition to event and another specific definition to process, and kind of distinguishing between these two. So pay attention to that, and then we're going to talk about it. So here we go. So try to stay with this. It is pretty dense. So here we go. Prophetic inspiration must be understood as an event, not as a process. What is the difference between process and event? A process happens regularly following a relatively permanent pattern. An event is extraordinary, irregular. A process may be continuous, steady, uniform. Events happen suddenly, intermittently, occasionally. Processes are typical. Events are unique. A process follows a law. Events create a precedent. Okay, so here's the start. So you kind of see he's outlining event and process. So these two different things. He's going to keep going, sort of describing it. So here we go. A process occurs in the physical order, but not all events are reducible to physical terms. For instance, the life of Beethoven left music behind, yet valued in physical terms, its effects on the world were felt less than the effect of a normal rainstorm or earthquake. So you see what he's saying there? Do you want to pause? Does everyone get what he's saying there about Beethoven? Okay, that the music of Beethoven really can't be judged on a physical level, right? Okay, I'm going to keep going, and then we're going to talk more about this. Man lives in an order of events, not only in an order of processes. It is a spiritual order. Moments of insight, moments of decision, moments of prayer may be insignificant to the world of space, yet they put life into focus. Nature is made up of processes. Organic life, for example, may be described as consisting of the processes of birth, growth, maturity, and decay. History consists primarily of events. What lends human historical character to the life of Pericles or Aristotle are not the organic processes through which they went, but the extraordinary, surprising, and unpredictable acts, achievements, or events which distinguish them from all other human beings. And here's the final paragraph. I know this is deep, so dense, stay with me. An event is a happening that cannot be reduced to a part of a process. It is something we can neither predict nor fully explain. To speak of events is to imply that there are happenings in the world that are beyond the reach of our explanations. What the consciousness of events implies, the belief in revelation, claims explicitly, namely that a voice of God enters the world which pleads with man to do his will. Okay, so this is pretty deep. I want to read that last verse, that last bit. That the voice of God enters the world which pleads with man to do God's will. I'm gonna just stop here. I know that was pretty dense. I promise that was the hardest text that we're gonna look at. The rest of them are a little easier, but I want to put our thinking on cap on for just a minute and talk about these. So you can see Rabbi Heschel is distinguishing, or he's giving these terms event and process. He's giving them very, very specific definitions. I want to talk about that. Does everyone understand that? Let's talk about that a little bit. What is a process? What is an event? Does someone want to kind of reword this or rephrase it? According to Heschel, what is a process? What is an event? How can we distinguish these two things?
I can try.
Go for it.
A process. I have a study partner, Jeff. He's in this class, and we're reading this book. We've been reading it for like 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And when we get together, we do one paragraph at a time.
Right.
It's very much in nuggets.
Yeah.
A process often follows the laws of nature. Even the parting of the Sea of Reeds or the Red Sea could be considered a process, because sometimes there are natural events which open up bodies of water. An event for me, and I always go back to this, is when a stick eats snakes, which also we're told happened. Snakes could eat other snakes, and that was part of what the the Pharaoh's magicians did to prove that Moses' stick was not particularly exceptional. But then at the end of that episode, when a stick eats the snakes of the magicians, then we have an event. We have something which turns the laws of nature completely upside down, and which I think has not been repeated. For me, a process, and I'm stealing from Rabbi Artson, actually, because I was just listening to him, Rabbi Bradley Artson. A process is replicable, it's public, and it's testable. We can design the experiment and we'll get the same results if this, or we won't. But an event, I think Heschel talks about this in other places, it's a one-time deal.
Right. Oh, so I love that. I love how you're connecting them to processes are connected to the sort of the natural order, and events are sort of outside the natural order. And processes are replicable and events are unique. So that's what I'm getting. I like that. Anyone else want to make a comment about these definitions? Either kind of putting them in your own words or just a comment about what you're getting from that before we ask some more questions. I know this is kind of deep, so stay with me. We're going somewhere, I promise. So along these lines, let's talk a little bit more about, Linda, I see your hand is up.
I think for me, an event has a beginning and an end. So it's a discrete event. And I think that it's a quantum change, because a process is a progressive change and it's evolutionary. And I agree, it sort of follows the processes of nature. But an event can be something rapid onset or even slow onset, but it can be startling and it will change things for you. You can't go back to before the event time.
Right. Okay. So I like that. So you're saying that an event has a start and a finish.
Yeah.
Okay. I like that. All right. So along those lines, I'll ask a question. Processes and event. Is a process automated? And is there free will involved in it? and is an event. I guess my question is, where is free will in either of those equations, or at all? Do processes happen automatically? Is there free will involved in them? Any thoughts on that? I know this is deep, but I just want to get a sense of your take on that, and then I promise we'll move on to some other things. And while you're thinking about that, here's another question: who can initiate a process, and who can initiate an event?
Hi, where do I go? Am I on?
You're on, Howard.
Oh, okay, good. Well, to me, an event is it's just something that exists. But a process is something that changes. It's a series of events. It tells you the process is how you get from one event to another event. Okay, so
Right, that's very Heschelian, yes.
So like
Event to
to me,
event.
this is, all right, so to me, the rabbi talked about this last Shabbos, right? Maybe it was the Shabbos before, but anyway, it was, the point of what he said was, as I took it, life is about the changes. What is changing? Because anything can be an event, like a rock just sitting there can be an event. Anything that happens in the universe or has happened in the past is an event. But the fact that it happened, the happening that keeps happening is process. And it could be a random process. It doesn't have to be a willed process. It doesn't have to be according to a rule, right? If you flip a coin 1,000 times, whether it comes up heads or tails at any time is effectively random, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you flip it 1,000 times and you take the total number of times it came heads and the total number of tails, by magic, it's just about half and half.
Interesting. You know what I like about that example is that there is a difference between the sort of collection of data in that case and any one singular instance.
Right.
Right. So that's interesting to me. Keep that in your head. But so we're going to move on to the next text. But I want to say, so Heschel. Oh, I see Sharon's hand before. Yeah, Sharon, you have a comment.
I was saying that I think an event inserts itself into history because some events are more explainable than others, and they do then presumably have an effect, but an event can be outside of most people's knowledge of it too. In
Sure.
fact, outside of anybody's knowledge of it, as
Sure.
far as we know. And so in a sense, it's a miracle that happens, whether that miracle was invented by a person or by God. And I do like the idea of process going toward event, but at the same time, I think that you'd have to identify that a process was progressive in order to believe that it led toward an event. If the event is supposed to then carry on history because history repeats itself, and if it's an upward spiral or not is a question, so that an event then could displace whatever process was on its way and create a new pattern.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Oh, Hal's a comment.
I might be looking at it a little differently. I'm not sure. It seems to me that an event has a higher probability, a higher possibility, I guess, of being extraordinary, and then can give rise to process. There's a higher possibility of an event being a discovery, whether it was a human discovery or whether it was an event of the divine. And from that may come processes as we try to explain it. So I think I'm I might be turning it on its head
No,
from,
I think what you're saying is very Heschel. That is, I think that's the way that Heschel is saying it. That's the way I take it as well. Heschel almost looks at processes as automated, that even though humans have free will, we live these processes in our lives that cannot help but be determined by our circumstances and personality and many other factors outside of our control, that there is a sort of determinism in the processes of our lives. And as you're saying, how events take us out of that. Events are off of the wheel, if it were, as it were, off of the conveyor belt, and are sort of these creative and unique and singular acts that can insert themselves at any moment. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, and an event can put us, to further your analogy, an event can put us on another conveyor belt.
True.
One that we never knew about before.
True. Okay, one more comment from Howard, and then let's move on to the next one. You're muted. You're muted, Howard.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that if you believe that the universe started from it had to start, like the Big Bang or something. That's an event, right?
Mm-hmm.
No process is behind it. It just bang happens, right? And then everything else that follows, if you believe that in cause and effect, that everything that happens has a cause, except that one first thing, then every event that ever will happen is already somehow contained or implied in the very first event. And there is no free will. So to me, if people say, when he says processes are based on laws or they follow laws, I don't know whether I totally am. I think that is contradictory to the idea that we have free will. And I think free will is somehow deeply connected with randomness.
That's
because it's something that has, if we think that's it to be freely willed, it can't have been caused by anything except me, and I just thought of it, then that means that it didn't come from any previous causes except me. But the only kinds of events that are like that are random events that don't come from process. They just sort of happen.
So I think, and I'm not an expert on Heschel, but I think that Heschel would say that process does, at least to a degree, preclude free will, but event does not, for some of the reasons that you're saying, Howard. And I also think that Heschel would say, while on any moment we have the opportunity to choose between A and B, or between good and evil, we don't have the option not to choose. You see what I'm saying? So there is this question being asked of us from the universe or from God, or something asking us to respond in one way or the other. So let's leave it at that. I want to move to the next text, because I really want to make sure we get to the final ones. Those are the ones that are really my essential texts, and I really want to get there. So we're going to look at one more excerpt from Heschel, from God in Search of Man, and then I want to move on to the last two. So along these lines and along this conversation, this is also from God in Search of Man on the freedom chapter. Two things here. So Heschel says, we have said that the grand premise of religion is that man is able to surpass himself. Such ability is the essence of freedom. Yeah. And then later in the same chapter, to believe in freedom is to believe in events. And again, he's going back to that definition, process versus events, okay? To believe in freedom is to believe in events, namely to maintain that man is able to escape the bonds of the processes in which he is involved, and to act in a way not necessitated by the antecedent factors. Freedom is the state of going out of the self, an act of spiritual ecstasy in the original sense of the term. So let's just take a moment on this one, and then I want to move on to the Wendell Berry poem. Does that quote tie up a little bit of what we were talking about? This idea that humans can surpass themselves, that's the premise of religion, and that it's based on this idea of freedom, and freedom is based on the idea of events. Anyone who's tracking with me? Hal, you want to make a comment?
I think it ties back to the very first text you showed us, dealing with whether we're spiritual beings that have human events occur, if you will, lowercase e, I guess, or whether it's vice versa. I think that as we go through our day-to-day lives, and at least I'm speaking for myself, I too often see things and see my own life in just the opposite context, the opposite order. And maybe it's only when I'm in shul listening to something very thoughtful that I realize that it is the other way. Whereas I think what's being said here is it is the other way. It's just that on a day-to-day basis, we don't always see that.
Mm.
And so I can tie this back to that very first teaching that you displayed.
I love that. I love that. I love that connection. And I agree with you. I think it's normal. I think our natural way to view the world is that we're just here, we're flesh and blood, we're human beings, and the life of the spirit is sort of another dimension that maybe we dip our toes in sometimes. I think that's a natural starting point for most of us. And like you said, both of those two sources are sort of flipping that upside down. Leah, do you have a comment?
Yeah, bunch of stuff, but I'll just try to. I think one of the great things I love about being a Jew is the life of the spirit is not separated from the life of the body.
Yes,
From
love that.
The minute you're born, it's about breath, it's about blood, it's about ideas about purity and impurity. Wake up in the morning, I'm using the bathroom and I'm praying. I'm washing my hands and I'm praying.
Love that.
I'm leaving the house. I'm going into the house. I'm eating. I'm done eating. And so when things get leaden, i.e. not spiritual, and maybe there's spirituality in heaviness and feeling awful and feeling like it's all hopeless also, we have the mitzvot, which are like these stepping stones to get us to nowhere, but to sort of like get us back on track, to get us out of the little ego-driven sleazebag kind of thing that we often get on, and say, yeah, you might not even believe it, but you might as well just put the talit on. Just put it on and say the bracha for that.
Right.
And then get the tzitzit in your hands and kiss, kiss, kiss. I mean, who cares? Just do it because we're told to do it. And it really is so effective in taking us somewhere else.
I love that so much. Naaseh v'nishma. We will do, and then we will hear, we will understand. I love that. And you're right, Leah, that is so Jewish. And I love that about our tradition, that we are not a people that sort of abstracts spirituality or abstracts ourselves or removes ourselves from this world. We are very much about being in this world. And I love that so much. And I love that you brought that in. With that thought, I think that's a perfect transition to our next text. So actually, before I put it on the screen, I'll just give a little introduction. So these next two are pieces that are really dear to me, and they were really sort of where I wanted to go tonight. So that's why I want to make sure we have enough time for them. So the next piece comes from a Wendell Berry poem called The Farm. The poem is over 400 lines. This is just a little excerpt from it. I do recommend that you look it up and read the whole thing, and please read it out loud to yourself or to someone else, because it's poetry and it should be read out loud. And the whole poem, so Wendell Berry is a modern poet. He's in his 80s. He's still alive. He is an activist, an academic, as well as a farmer. And a lot of his poetry has agrarian themes. And interestingly, though he is not Jewish, a lot of mention and thoughts about Sabbath and rest is in his poetry. And the poem, the farm, I'm going to read this excerpt to you. The excerpt I'm about to read, like I said, the poem is more than 400 lines. The excerpt I'm about to read is well more than 300 lines in to the poem. Okay. So what we've been reading up to this point is a lot of details about his farm. And he's talking about which crops, when you do the corn and when you do the clover, and when the lambs are, when the ewes are born, and then how you've got to watch out for the coyotes, and then you've got to do your home garden, and all these things. He's going into a lot of detail about the farm, and then he gets to this piece that I want to read. But yeah, please look it up. Please read it to yourself. It's really an incredible poem. So here we go. Let me put this back on the screen. Okay, so here we are. It's just these lines right here. And so you make the farm, and so you disappear into your days into the ground. Before you start each day, the place is as it is, and at the day's end, it is as it is, a little changed by work, but still itself, having included you and everything you've done. And it is who you are, and you are what it is. You will work many days no one will ever see. Their record is the place. This way you come to know that something moves in time that time does not contain. For by this timely work you keep yourself alive. As you come into time and as you'll leave, God's dust, God's breath, a little light. So I want to pause here for just a moment, and I want to hear some reactions to this, and maybe just as you're reading it to yourself or looking at it, maybe just some favorite words or lines that might be standing out to you. I'll take it down in a minute, but I'll leave it up for just a few more minutes. So we're going to relate this back to the other text, but first I just kind of want to hear reactions to this poem and maybe some favorite moments. So Howard and Ellen, I see your hand. You're muted.
There we go. How's that?
Thanks. Yeah.
This is like, where's the meaning coming from in all of this? You're doing the same thing. It's like you're following, like you said, an algorithm. It's mechanical. It's, and every day you do all the same stuff to the farm, and it keeps going. But basically, you're locked in a loop, right? And you're repeating and repeating. It's almost like your process has collapsed into an event.
Oh, I like that. Your process has collapsed into an event. I like that.
But because you're doing it, the meaning of it is that you did it. And that you did it, something moves in time that time does not contain. That's the meaning of it. You made your meaning. And what that meaning is going to survive the fact that there's a bigger loop surrounding you and everybody else who's working on anything. That we start from dust and we end in dust. But yet, you proved something was meaningful because the farm grew, because you were working.
Nice.
That's how I read it.
Nice. I love that. I love that. Rabbi Adam, I see your hand up.
This is a gorgeous passage, and I think there's a lot to be said about it, but what's jumping out to me personally is this idea of the way that places soak up the things that happened in them. And I think about that a lot, about what makes a sanctuary different than a room, or what makes a sacred place different than the ordinary place, what makes the kotel more than a retaining wall. It's not the architecture of the thing itself, it's the slow soaking up of spirit that happens in that place. And so I'm really, really struck by the place is as it is, and at the day's end, it is that it is a little changed by work, but still itself, having included you and everything you've done. What we add by bringing ourselves day after day, week after week, time after time to certain spaces, how we transform that space.
I love that. I love that. That's amazing. It made me think just now when you were saying that, when I had my first baby, Ezra, who's about to turn 7, he was just like, I think we went in, I don't remember, he was probably a couple weeks old. We went in for a checkup at the same birthing center where he was born. And I walked into the same room where he was born, and I hadn't been in that room since that day. And I just immediately was overcome. I mean, I was also 2 weeks postpartum, but just overcome with just this like kind of, I don't know what feeling, but emotion to be in this room. And it just felt like a holy, holy room to me. Anyway, so I totally get that. Sharon, I see your hand. Go with daddy, sweetheart.
I too see that really that something moves in time, that time does not contain, is the most beautiful lines in the poem. And it seems to me it is because somehow it's equating a person's spirit also with, as we were discussing, an event, that somehow the place and the person interconnect with one another so that the physical and the spiritual connect with each other and still keep on moving, so that if you feel, oh, at the end of my life, I'm just dust, it's still God's dust. And what you've added to the place is a little bit of light that comes from God too. So that a physical place and you both have the spiritual aspect too.
Love that. I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Diane, I see your hand.
First of all, this is beautiful, really beautiful. I appreciate you showing this. I see kind of a combination between the things I wrestle with science and religion. And I feel he is just describing how when we put energy in, energy is created and maintained. And so I see that, but also this totally took me back to when I walked the streets in Israel, how I felt, I had a visceral feeling of spirits around me. And I don't mean to sound woo-woo again, but truly it's the energy of all those that come around. And I, just as you described with your room, anytime we go to a place that has meaning and history, there's a different feeling of something that has been left there. And it describes it for me.
I agree. Leah.
I like the part of the poem. I like the whole thing, but this part about everything you've done, it is who you are. If you look at ballet dancers, or people who have danced their whole life, or people who have farmed their whole life, doing that thing changes your body, so that a ballet dancer who's 80 years old, you can still see it. You can see the wounds that are in the body. Someone who has farmed for 40, 50, 60 years, it's in their hands, it's in their feet, their knees, their hips, their back. The doing thing has the way a rock erodes in thousands or tens of thousands of years. We too, as the body, with what our life asks us to do, our body gets reshaped by that and becomes that. We are bent to the task. I have a big callus where I hold the knife when I cook, and it's the knife callus. I have calluses on my feet from sitting not in a chair, but on tatami most of my life.
So I love this. So this quote that something moves in time that time cannot contain, you're kind of taking the other side of that, which is also the thing that is moving in time is marking the place. It's marking the body. It's leaving a dent, an impression on those places. Yeah. So I love that. I love that the event of our lives, or the thing that is moving through time, or that time cannot contain, is marking the place, marking the process, maybe, if we want to think of it in those terms, And as Rabbi Adam said, that those places are somehow holding those events, holding those moments, those memories, those energies, maybe. Mimi.
I think the things that we do, I'm going to say repeatedly, but have become part of our routine, the spiritual, I'm going to use that word, but very loosely, also have an impact, a lasting impact on us, just as the dancer's movements affect his or her body.
Yeah.
We affect ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's amazing. So that actually, I think that's a good segue to go to our last text, that we affect ourselves, that we can make a mark on the world, I guess. Okay, is everyone seeing this again? Okay. Are you seeing my screen? Yes. Now, Jeremiah. Okay. All right. So I want to take a look at this last text, and I'll tell you, this was actually the first text that came to my mind that I wanted to share tonight, but I ended up deciding to make it last, and I wanted to end on it. And the reason I love this text, it was personal to me in a number of ways, but one of the ways was at the time that it kind of came into my awareness, I had a lot of, I think, self-doubts, and I was when we get into the text, I think you'll see maybe why, and we can talk more after we talk about the text, why it touched me in kind of in that area. But another reason that it's memorable, and this is kind of an event in my life, and it's sort of going back to new babies, was when Ezra was first born. It was, I think, the day after his bris, so he was just 9 days old. It was Shabbat, and we happened to have CBI Coastal, which is a minyan that meets off site here near my house, and so I decided to put him in the little like baby sling and walk over there, and I chanted the Haftarah that day. That was planned, but so I did that. But I think we had like a backup plan in case I wasn't going to make it. I think Ari was going to chant it for me. Anyways, I made it and I did it and I chanted it. And he was in the little sling, and I remember chanting these words that we're about to read. I remember chanting them there, and that's a memory that I have. And so it's kind of special to me for both of those reasons. So let's just take a look at this for a minute. I'll just give you an overview. So it's verse 5, 6, 7, 8. The first two verses 5 and 6 go together, and the second two verses 7 and 8 go together, but they're parallel verses, and they're actually part of a chiastic structure of verses before and after it as well, that are like a pattern in Tanakh. So the first two verses go like this. Thus said the Lord, cursed is he who trusts in man, who makes mere flesh his strength, who turns his thoughts from the Lord. They shall be like a bush in the desert, which does not sense the coming of good things. It is set in the scorched places of the wilderness, in a barren land without inhabitant. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then the parallel verses 7 and 8 are this. I'm going to read this bit in Hebrew. Baruch hagever asher yiftach b'Adonai. Blessed is he who trusts in the Lord. V'haya Adonai mivtacho, whose trust is in the Lord alone. V'haya ke'etz shatul al mayim, and he shall be like a tree planted by waters. V'al yuval yishalach sharashav, sending forth its roots by a stream. Velo yir'eh ki yavo chom. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. So these are two parallel descriptions. One is, it says, cursed is the person who trusts in humans or trusts in humankind. And they are like, if you look at verse 6, V'haya ka'arar ba'arva. They're like an arid bush in the desert. And one of the commentaries, that word ka'arar mentions another mention in Genesis when Abraham says, Ari, I am barren. Like, so this is like a barren tree, a lonely, barren, arid tree in the desert. And plus there's this alliteration, ka'arar ba'arva. It sounds good. So this is like poetic writing. So that's on the one hand. Cursed is the person who's living like this. They're an arid bush in the desert. And then velo yir'eh, I'm on verse 6 still. Velo yir'eh ki yavo tov. And you can see the parallel. See on verse 6, it says velo yir'eh ki yavo tov. This person cannot even see when good things come. And then later in in verse 8, when we're saying, when we're reading the kind of the second part of this, blessed is the person whose trust is in God, they'll be like a tree planted by water. It says, Velo yireh ki yavohom. These two lines are exactly the same except for the last word. So that person can't even see when the heat comes. Like they're just chilling. They've got their roots in the ground, and they're getting fed and nourished in the roots, and they don't even know if there's a drought. They don't even know if there's heat. They're like, I'm good. So that's the two different types here. So I want to just take a moment. Actually, I just took it down, but I can put it back up if you want. There's a famous line in there that you may recognize. Did anyone catch it? Hal, do you know where it's from? Who knows? There's a famous line that we see, that we read frequently.
Well, we see it in Birkat.
Yes. Baruch hagever asher yiftach b'Adonai. That bit. It's a famous line. So that line, blessed is the man whose trust is in God, that we have that in the Birkat Hamazon, the blessing we say after we eat. So let's talk kind of basically, what is the difference between these two plants? Let's talk about that. What's the difference between these two?
I think you need to put it back up.
I'll put it back up. I'm just reading. Thank you, Laura, for this nice comment that you made on here. I love this. I'll come back to that in a minute. Yeah, I'll put it back up for everyone. So verse 5 and 6, cursed, Arur hagever asher yiftach ba'adam. Cursed is the one who trusts in man. Hal, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'm going to sound like a broken record again. I think this still ties back to the first paragraph you showed us. If we lose perspective of whether we have a spiritual base or not, that likens itself to whether we live a life that is more like verses 5 and 6 here instead of 7 and 8.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, along those lines, do we have control? This is a question for you or for anyone, of where we are planted, and or can we dig ourselves up and replant?
Yes and no.
What do you think, Howard? Yeah, yes and no.
We have some, but not all, because we're living in a greater context. That doesn't mean that what we do is totally meaningless. So the first plant is like, all right, it doesn't trust in anything it tries to do.
Howard, we're kind of losing your audio. You're kind of coming in and out a little bit there.
All right, I think it's the direction.
When you turn, it's better.
The first plant is like, it's just sitting there and it's trying to survive, and all it can think of is itself and whether it's going to survive or not. But the one who trusts in God has a reason to survive, and therefore will survive. And I want to tie this to Laura's line here, or her paragraph that she wrote, because what she's, I think, saying is the whole, going back to the farm, the project of the farm is to keep the farm going, right? But how do we do that? We do it b'chol dor v'dor. And why do we have to do it b'chol dor v'dor? Because God says do it b'chol dor v'dor. And why is that important? Because you'll survive, but you'll survive with meaning in the survival. And the meaning comes from the fact that you did it for God, or you did it with the knowledge that it was divine, that it was holy. What you were doing had a greater meaning than just your own survival.
Sharon, I see you have a comment.
Yes, what I was thinking was how the passages about the two kinds of plants parallel each other and overturn one another, but that they're supposed to be, the like is really important. He shall be like. And I think the most important part of the whole comparison is that the tree planted by the waters sends forth its roots by a stream, the stream being like the Lord. And so that particular plant has a base in order not to feel bad when there's heat, because there might be heat and there might be a drought, but it's going to have fruit. Whereas the one that has no root in something that is holy or that's spiritual always feels like it's going to die.
I love that. I love that. So you're focusing on the roots. The roots. This says, "Va'al yuval yishalach sharashav," sending forth its roots by a stream. The tree planted by the water has like sent its roots. It's like sent itself out. It's plugged itself in to this nourishment.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Rabbi Adam, do you have a comment?
Yeah, building on that, Sharon, my favorite line from this is the "V'haya ke'et shetul al mayim," be like a tree planted by the water, which is also a line from the first Psalm. So the parallel between Jeremiah and the Psalms. But I read it slightly different than Sharon. I was understanding you was reading it. I understood you to be reading it about the tree is planted by this source of life that it's drawing from. I was reading it as a parallel between something which is rooted in one place and something which is dynamic and changing. Water is flowing, it's moving, it's peripatetic, it's never staying still. Be as a tree next to the flowing water, be rooted, find your place, put your stake in the ground, as opposed to being constantly in the flow.
Oh, I love that.
That felt parallel to me to the Wendell Berry, and that felt parallel to the Heschel. Where in the process, in the welter of life, do we place ourselves?
Right. Oh, I love that. Nice. Nice. Amazing. Leah, I read your comment here that you put in the chat, and I love this comparison that you're making to the burning bush. Do you want to say more about that?
No, I want to say something else.
Okay, go ahead.
Which is, I think this is saying we're going to have a diaspora, but we're going to have a tree of life, which is a Torah. It's portable wherever you are. You just take that with you, and you'll be a-okay.
I agree with you.
Amazing. I want to point out one thing that really stands out to me, and this is where, when we were talking about this came to me in kind of a moment of insecurity. Why? It's these two parallel lines. Velo yireh ki yavo. So in both cases, the first tree and the second tree, it says that they could not see or perceive when something was coming. So the first tree cannot see when good things were coming to them. And then the second tree could not see when heat was coming. Like they were like immune. Like they both were sort of immune. They built up this immunity to certain things based on the choices that they had made. So there was like, and this is what was kind of, in my mind, tying it to this idea of process and event and free will, because there was maybe some initial choices to plug in or not plug in, like what Sharon was talking about, sort of plug into this source of life and nourishment. What Rabbi's talking about, plugging into this constant dynamism of life and water. Or not, or being sort of in the desert alone, as it says, in loneliness, without anyone around them, and having no roots or no support to live off of. But from that choice, they both had built this sort of immunity where they could not see something. So the first tree cannot see when good things happen, and this was meaningful to me because I was in a place in my life, and I was dealing with this other person, and it kind of came to me like, this person doesn't see a good thing that's happening to them right now. Like this is a good thing happening to them. And then meanwhile, I felt like, but I also, I do, and I'm gonna dig in and sort of keep my roots in, and whether anyone knows it or not, or sees it or not, or believes in me or not, I'm going to put my roots in and be nourished by that, and the proof will be in the pudding. That was sort of my my little self talk, pep talk that I gave myself at that moment. So there's like this moment of choice where we plant ourselves, replant ourselves, we plug in, and then by doing so, that it may actually affect the process by which we are able to perceive what happens next, right? So I thought that was interesting. Howard, do you have a comment?
Oh, no, I just think that you're totally right. It's like what the real question is how adaptable are you? Can you make something out of a combination of your will and what you find yourself in the middle of? Yeah. Terrible thing, yeah. There's all these things you read, like Harold Kushner, why do bad things happen? But the issue is not why they happen. The issue is why are some people able to make something positive out of it in the end? And why are others like the first tree? And I think the reason is because they don't see the source of meaning, because because the source of meaning doesn't come from the operation of the universe, or the fact that you can have a farm, or the fact that you're a yeshiva booker and you can memorize the Talmud or anything else. The source of meaning is from your belief in, it's what he said in the previous poem, or not the previous poem, what Heschel said in the last quote you read before we went to the poems. That man can surpass himself, that we can make contact with something that is outside of our events. It's outside of our processes, that reaches towards some grand process of which we are a part. And therefore we become greater than ourselves. And not that to aggrandize ourselves, but to infuse our existence while we're here with meaning, and so that it's not just the futile, that it's not surrounded by futility. And I think that's what God does to me. And that's why they're still Jews, because we kept them, which is sort of also what Laura's saying in her write-up, I think.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Yeah, you can do that. Gotta help her in here. Laura, I'm reading through your comment here. I love this last thing that you say, little markers around the farm that we were here, that generations have cared about and stewarded this land, that humans are in partnership across time. Very moving. I love how you connect that to family and generations, and that we're working together. Thank you for that comment. So it's 8 o'clock. I want to wrap this up. Thank you guys for staying with me. I know some of that was like kind of trippy. So thanks for going there with me and really thinking and contributing to that. And I really love getting to learn with you. I'll just leave you with this one final thought. So as spiritual beings having a human experience, what are we to do with ourselves? And I'm taking away this idea of the K'etz Shatul Amayim. We do this thing. I like to do this thing, this practice that I like to lead, called prayer song. And we've chanted this bit before, and we actually have sat around in a circle and we've just say, make me like a tree planted by water, make me like a tree planted by water, make me like a tree planted by water. And we just keep saying that over and over. And it's a little crazy, but it's actually a really special. I really love doing that. So I'll leave you with that. And I bless each of us that we should be K'etz Shatul Amayim, like trees planted near water, that we should be nourished, that our roots should go deep, and that we should feel that dynamic source of life and nourishment in ourselves spiritually. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.